want to get in. But now we have our next working group, which also has I'm going to say it again, a nice Canadian connection, where I'm really pleased to introduce the community response, the judicial process one, but also the innovations in state prevention. So I'll turn it over to the leads on those working groups. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much, and good afternoon. I guess it's still morning. No, is it afternoon? It's still morning. Good morning. My name is Ann Williams. I'm a former judge of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit and the U.S. District Court in Chicago, Illinois. I'm now of counsel for Jones Day and lead the Rule of Law Pro Bono project in Africa. I want to thank you, Laura, for inviting me here. I was here at the beginning, and I will always say yes. And I'm particularly honored and privileged to lead the Judicial Process Group with my co-chairs, Amy Spicknalik, who you heard earlier, Rick Dean, Rick and Don Collins, and Ken Gormley. Our committee is made up of judges, lawyers, victims, survivors, academics, and others. And our goal, to identify concrete solutions to improve the judicial process, the trying of cases involving hate-fueled violence. The work began last year. We had several Zoom calls, and we focused on deliverables. One, how can we help courts prepare to handle both civil and criminal cases, providing and creating a judicial toolkit. 2, supporting victims during the judicial process. And 3, addressing the limits of speech, First Amendment speech, that's constitutional, and that spills over to incite violence, particularly to disrupt democracy and to disrupt the judicial process. So, as to the first, the toolkit. Thanks to the hard work of Isaac Will and Ira Carroll, many, many months spent interviewing judges and lawyers and observers, participants, victims of various cases, reviewing transcripts, looking at orders, we now have an outline for our toolkit with the eye toward providing best practices. And the next step, more examples, more research, more input from others, and also a special focus on security, because it arose in our first in-person meeting yesterday, how critical security issues are to witnesses, to the judiciary, to the lawyers. So there'll be a section on that. And after we get more meat on the bones in the report, then we also decided there really should be 3 iterations of this document. 1, a toolkit for the judiciary, both civil and criminal cases, and 2, for practitioners, a guide for prosecutors and for lawyers that want to bring civil cases. And finally, the 3rd iteration, for victims, survivors, for the public to understand the judicial process. So before a trial begins, or when there's a consideration of a filing of a lawsuit, victims have something and survivors have something to have as a guide to understand the judicial process. And that leads me to our second deliverable, bringing victims into the process. Don and Rick Collins had Shirlethia Franklin, a Jones Day partner of ours, with them during the trial of the murderer of their son. She explained what was going on, what the rulings meant, why there were delays. And that was extremely helpful. Amy, who you heard from earlier, she was the architect of the Charlottesville trial. She was writing once a week, sending messages, summaries of what was going on in the trial to survivors, to victims, to supporters, and to others. And then Tom Allen, who's in our group, had a law class, and he ended up monitoring the Bowers trial just because he was so interested in that case and the significance of it, and he was writing a weekly summary to his law students. And Michelle, a survivor of the Tree of Life, found out and really but was very informed by understanding what was going on using everyday language, not lawyer talk. And so that subcommittee will focus on who can do this for victims and survivors, who can explain the process. It can't be the prosecutors and the judge and the lawyers trying the case. They do their best, but there's certain restrictions. So who can do it? So this subcommittee will be focusing on marshaling existing pro bono legal organizations, bar associations, law firms, to provide lawyers to do this when cases like this arise. Of course, there'll be a need to train these lawyers so they know how to interact properly with victims and survivors, and also to talk, people talk, not lawyer talk. As Governor Tom Corbett said in our meeting, make it simple, make it simple. And the final subcommittee focusing on, and we have academics in our group, will focus on the First Amendment. What's appropriate constitutional speech and what crosses the line as unconstitutional speech, hate speech that incites violence. There'll be studies of some of the opinions of judges because there's a growing amount of precedent in terms of the First Amendment issues, and hopefully there'll be law review articles and other publications that will assist the public, the judiciary, lawyers to understand that issue that we're grappling with, particularly in this era and time of social media. So I look forward to circulating those reports, to feedback, and to always saying yes to this phenomenal and important work. And with that, I turn it over to Vidhya.
Thank you so much, Anne, and also just, wow, I have so many questions for you, but I know that's not why I'm here, so we'll keep that for later. Thank you so much, Laura, as ever. Thank you, Brett, for the introduction. I am going to be doing a duo act here with Paula from New York State, representing the Innovations in State Prevention Working Group. I've been involved with Eradicate Hate since its very first year, and it has always been made abundantly clear to us that the summit is not intended to be a talking shop. We are expected to make progress year on year, and the working group that we're here representing is a new working group, but it's not new in that it is the evolution of conversations, meetings, and connections that have been made since last year at Eradicate Hate. Last year, those of you who were present at Eradicate Hate remember that as a community, we reflected on the horrific violence which took place in Buffalo, New York in May of last year. At last year's summit, we learned more about the perpetrator. We crucially heard from survivors, and many of us started planning new solutions. What could this look like? How do we ensure this doesn't happen again? And nationwide programs are, of course, critical to achieve scale as we plan prevention across the country. But I think we have all recognized the critical importance of local solutions, solutions that are rooted locally, especially if we are seeking to actually intervene with people considering violence and stop them in their paths. I know many in this room believe, and it goes beyond belief because there's evidence to show, that no one is too far gone, that if we stand a chance at stopping someone who might be considering violence, we need to find them, and we need to connect them into the kinds of services to work with people that can de-escalate them from violence. And that is most effectively done at state and local levels. So states and state programming is a critical part of the solution. And I'm going to hand over to Paula from New York State to talk through how New York has responded since all of those reflections that we made last year at Eradicate Hate on the attack in Buffalo.
Thanks, Vidhya. Good morning, everyone. My name is Paula Granger, and I'm the director of the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Unit within the New York State Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services. And building off of what Vidhya just laid out for you, after the Buffalo mass attack, Governor Hochul pretty much immediately signed Executive Order 18, which had several different mandates in it, a couple of which I'll mention right now because it's important for our working group. The first was that every county and the city of New York create a domestic terrorism prevention plan and submit it to our office by the end of last year, which I'm happy to report happened. It also mandated the creation of a unit dedicated to preventing domestic terrorism, and it's my pleasure to help manage this unit. And finally, and importantly, it created the Threat Assessment and Management Program. The intention behind this program was to provide funding to help the counties get their domestic terrorism prevention plans together, but also to help create and bring together a multidisciplinary group of stakeholders local to that community so they can start thinking about how they can identify early when there's a potential threat in the community, and then what they can do about that threat to off-ramp a person from the pathway to violence. All of what we've been doing is firmly situated within a public health informed approach, and that's very important to us. We can all agree here, and there's a lot of research that backs this up, that there are most often warning signs and warning behaviors before an event, like what happened in Buffalo and what's happened here in Pittsburgh. Those warning signs present potential opportunities for us to be able to identify early and again get that person off of a trajectory towards a violent event. Our goal is to meet people where they are, and people are in physical spaces and they are in online spaces. The idea behind our threat assessment and management teams is for them to be able to take information, hopefully earlier before an escalation to violence, determine whether or not there's a threat, and figure out what to do about that threat. And that's our physical spaces, churches, workplaces, schools, etc. Online spaces, which we all can recognize, and we all do recognize that increasingly is becoming an unfortunate conduit for radicalization. That's where our partnership with Moonshot and Vidhya's team comes into play. Building out a prevention practitioners network across New York State really helps with getting people the help that they need. And it's very specialized help that not everyone is well equipped to do. We really want to build out this overarching violence prevention architecture across New York State that meets people where they are. I also want to really emphasize that there's a lot that we don't know. Our unit is just now 9 months old, so this is a very early moment for us, but we're here because we want to talk about what we've learned so far, some of the main challenges we've seen, share lessons learned, and also hear what everyone else has to say about it so we can take those lessons back and apply them to our future. So thank you again.
And just a few, sorry, as the clapping begins, I'm sorry, you have to listen to me speak for just 2 more minutes. I want to just say a couple words about what the working group will be seeking to do over the next week. A lot of the work that Paula described, this is not a solo endeavor by the state. There are a number of individuals, organizations across the Eradicate Hate community who are involved in this. Counselors, behavioral health specialists in this room, practitioner networks, trainers, lawyers, survivors. So delivering prevention at a state level doesn't just require state governments to be willing to take that bold action. It involves all of us as a prevention community bringing together the various collective tools that we have and really trying to create a multidisciplinary model. So here, this year at Eradicate Hate, this is, as I mentioned, a new working group. We have convened a group of 13 states, from Texas to Pennsylvania, Utah to Minnesota, alongside service providers, lawyers, psychologists, the list goes on. And our aim this week will be to go well beyond thinking about state strategies and talking through what it actually takes to implement this. What does it look like when we actually try to deliver this in practice? And as Paula said, this is not easy stuff. We're hitting up against challenges every day. 2 things can be true at once. On the one hand, there's a lot of learning that we can build from. We're not starting from scratch. But on the other hand, we do all need to accept as a community that a lot of this is experimental. We're trying new things, and it's going to be hard. So our working group tomorrow will unpick the key elements of state violence prevention models. First and foremost, behavioral health and case management support. What does it look like in practice to have local behavioral health and wraparound services actually intervene with people at the state level who are considering violence? 2 is building the caseload. How do we actually get people to those services in the state if they need help? And 3rd, standards of practice. How do we ensure interventions delivered at the state level are delivered responsibly, legally, safely? What are the minimum standards that we're willing to accept? And as for how New York specifically has responded, those of you who stick around until Friday, I hope some of you will have the opportunity to hear more about some of the work happening in New York to build safeguarding mechanisms online and to intervene with people who might be considering violence online. So thank you so much. We're really looking forward to the week. We're really excited to work with all of you. And thank you again to Laura and Brett.
Thank you. Thank you.